not earlier. Are we on time? Yeah. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee being held on Monday, the 31st of July 2023. It's being held in person as well as the Zoom facility. So particularly welcome for those who are joining us remotely. For those who are in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If members of the public who are present do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any person filming or photographing may be aware. Thank you. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants, and I request they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they're called upon. Particularly welcome to Councillor Peter Stoddart, who's joining us remotely. Thank you, Peter, for joining this meeting. Item was apologies for absence. Have to be any apologies? I don't think so. Everybody's here. Thank you very much. So no substitutes. Declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any interest on the agenda? Thank you. No. So moving in then on to the minutes of the last meeting. The minutes of the meeting held on 23rd of June 2023 are included in the agenda. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content to assign the minutes as an accurate record? Thank you very much. I see plenty of nods. So moving on then to item 5, which is questions from members of the public. And we do have a supplemental question from a member of the public. I don't know whether they want to ask the question or for me to read it out.
Chair, if I may, the question is answered, we display it and I'll read it out. So bear with me just while I put that on the screen. The supplementary question from Ms. Reid is, I consider my public question was not answered as the response does not indicate either no or yes to whether the committee will consider updating the register. The rate of children in care in Herefordshire is about twice its statistical neighbours' average, and the costs are high on average for each child. Fostering over £16,000 per annum, fostering agencies over £46,000 per annum, children's homes over £260,000 per annum. If the number of children in care is reduced, e.g. by reunification of children with their families, placement sufficiency, e.g. foster placement, is mitigated. Make recommendations to ensure effective risk management, and the corporate risk register is presented at today's committee meeting. Therefore, please would the committee consider in this meeting updating further actions required of CRR 60 sufficiency strategy on the risk on the register, include actions to reduce the number of children in care.
Thank you for the supplemental. Very aware of concerns in this area, which you've expressed previously. Strictly speaking, CR 60 relates to the development of a sufficiency strategy to ensure that there is sufficient accommodation of different types for our looked after children and young people. The risk relates to the need to obtain best value from our accommodation providers. As such, the actions you request do not relate to the strategy, and it is not necessary for the service area to make the changes. Having said that, as stated in the reply of the 23rd of June and in the initial response to you, your point about the number of children in care is well made, and the service area is already aware, as is this committee, and we will continue to consider your concerns in future meetings. Thank you. Moving on, item 6, questions from councillors. There are none. So we'll move to the first substantive item, which is the internal audit annual opinion 2022-23, which is item 7. And this is a report of the internal audit head of strategic finance. So, Andrew, are you going to speak to this one?
Hi, Chair. Ian and Gina here from SWAP, so
Okay.
if we pass them to take paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting me here today in the capacity of Head of Internal Audit to present my annual opinion for 22-23. The report is in Appendix A, which is on page 31 of the agenda pack. The purpose of this report is to provide a written annual report to you and you're those people charged with governance to give you indications around the adequacy of the internal control environment, and that includes risk management and governance arrangements. It's to look at the risk and consider the potential for fraud. It's to summarise the work that we've undertaken during the year, and it's to draw attention to any concerns that happen throughout the year. So that's the purpose of the report. On page 32, there are a number of headlines in the at a glance section. I'm going to run through those with you. The first is around activity and outcomes. During the year, we undertook 47 internal audits, all pieces of work, and those would include assurance audits, they would include advice, there were a number of special investigations, and there would be follow-up work. On the very positive front, 80% of our work came up with an annual opinion of either reasonable or substantial assurance. In terms of coverage, which is another area in there, I've reported throughout the year the coverage that we have in the committee. And during the year, we have covered 6 out of the 8 auditable strategic risks. And they've had either good or some audit coverage. This means that during the year, we've been able to focus our work on those strategic risks. And it means that I can give you this opinion saying that there's been effective coverage across the year. The third item on there is around issues that I bring to this committee's attention. On a positive front, again, there are no areas of high corporate risk. However, there are 3 themes I would like to bring to your attention. The first is around financial controls and budgetary management in particular. And details of that are on page 36 of the agenda pack. The issue is around the fact that some services are not using commitment accounting or are not validating payments properly in the system. To give you some context, that is only isolated services. In general, the council operates very well and is very effective in those areas, but there are some isolated services. Of course, the impact of that is that payments are made maybe without potential budgetary provision being in place. So it's very important that those controls are implemented and acted on immediately. In terms of SWAP, how can I support you with this? Well, I intend to, throughout the year, deliver training, some awareness training to those departments and services that have those weaknesses at the moment, and that at the moment is particularly in the area of grant administration. So we're looking at delivering some kind of awareness training and help support you in that. The second area is around grant administration itself. And the issue around that area is that there are inconsistent practices and there's somewhat a lack of knowledge of grant administration. Again, that's in isolated areas, so it's not widespread, but isolated. The impact of that would be that evidence sometimes cannot always be provided to support the expenditure or the outcomes of the grants, and that could result in a loss of grant income. Again, to support that, we'll go back to the first recommendation again, that we're looking at helping support the council by offering some kind of training in those areas, and some of that's actually been done already. And the final issue is around some oversight in terms of regulators' reports and plans. Whilst clearly the actions of the key regulators are picked up and the council monitors effectively, we found some evidence that some of the smaller regulators, the reviews may have slipped through the net a little bit, and there was the oversight could have been improved. As a result of that, the impact would be that some of those actions may not be mitigated, and without mitigation, that means those risks still are there that could potentially occur. So, in terms of an action, again, I won't support the council, but we will encourage assurance mapping. I think we're working along the lines of the first step of that, and we are looking to first of all understand and record where those issues are. And we are offering to do that. We're talking to the performance team at the moment around the whole kind of action tracking process. We're looking to offer to support them and use our current audit board system, our online real-time system, to start tracking actions on their behalf. That would include internal audit actions, certainly, but could include external regulator actions, which would mean the committee have more oversight over those. And that would be a real-time system, so you could drive into it at any time to see the position. The fourth headline is around the consideration of other forms of assurance, and those would be areas like the counter-fraud activity, any follow-up work that we've done, and the risk management processes. Overall, I found that they were all operating effectively. Overall, all outstanding actions were generally implemented, although there needs to be some improvement in some of the long-term actions they need to be focused on. And again, we'll support the performance team and work with them to make sure that that happens. And the final headline is around the prevention and detection of fraud. SWAP have undertaken a baseline maturity assessment throughout the year and also a fraud risk assessment. We have a good working relationship with the fraud team, and the fraud team are working very successfully. And so that enables us to have oversight over fraud-related matters to make sure that we build that into internal audit work. So therefore, the council have demonstrated effective control, and they've been able to protect public funds from fraud. So those five areas lead me then to my overall opinion. And my overall opinion for the year is that generally Heritage Council have sound systems of governance, risk management and internal control. However, there is some scope for improvement in some areas. Thank you for listening. I'll happily answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much. Ian, at the very top of the paper, it has this arrow showing where we sit. What's the kind of direction of travel compared to the last 2 or 3 years? Are we improving or being up to the same place or what?
In terms of, it's a very difficult thing to put an indicator about the level of internal control. It is very subjective, based on elements of work that we do. But in line with the previous performance, it's in line. So that, again, reasonable assurance in past ones, and in lines with most local authorities, it's very similar as well. So you're pretty much part of the norm.
Middle of the pack.
I would say so.
Thank you. Any questions from the team members? Right.
Thank you, David. Obviously, a lot of what you've shared, Ian, is we're not fully, no, I'm going to say I am not fully understanding of some of the phrases that you use. So could you sort of, so as we know what you're exactly you're talking about, when you talk about an external regulator assessment, is there some sort of practical thing you can show us that would cover?
Yes, I mean, obviously a number of regulators, external regulators audit the council through the year, and there's clearly the larger ones, but the ones that we're talking about in particular are maybe things that are at lower service level. The example that I can give you is the general registrar charge report that looks at the registration services, which is on the agenda today. A number of recommendations were made in a review there, and there was no particular oversight in terms of the delivery of those, so they weren't particularly tracked from a managerial point of view, an oversight level, so that when they weren't implemented, the council weren't particularly aware of the fact that those hadn't been implemented. So we're just looking to pick up on those things around the periphery, not the obvious ones, but the ones around the periphery. And again, I think having some reporting to committee around the delivery of those regulatory actions will give you assurance to a certain degree as well.
And the other question then, you said protection from fraud and the fraud team. Is the fraud team a body that works within the council, would be my question.
It is, absolutely. The council have got a counter fraud team, and that's built within the council. SWAP also have a counter fraud team as well, and we work in unison, but ultimately the council's fraud team are very successfully preventing and detecting fraud at the moment.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian, for the presentation. About fraud, how do you measure the impact of fraud if we can't actually tell how much money was missing or lost because, cash-based systems, paperwork wasn't filled in properly, money is lost? There didn't seem to be a way of identifying the impact of historical fraud. So how do we know we're reducing it or improving it, other than just identifying it's a possibility?
Thank you. I think in terms of the big picture of fraud, there are a number of ways that we look at it. We undertake assessments throughout the year. So there's the fraud baseline assessment that looks at where we are in terms of process, in terms of investigating, detecting fraud. And that's shown that the council are performing well. We also carry out a risk assessment that looks at each individual area, looks at what we'd expect to be in place in terms of the controls, again, for protecting against fraud. The counter fraud team then go and look at any examples of investigations, so they feed into that. We then carry out audit work as well that will feed into that fraud risk assessment, and it will give us an indication of how well controlled those areas are. That doesn't mean that fraud can't occur, because fraud can occur, believe me, in the real world. I think the issues you're mentioning are more specific to one area, and it is more difficult to quantify when we have some issues around a lack of records. It is more difficult to quantify, absolutely. But I think the most important thing is, as a council, that we are looking to rectify those issues, rectify those controls, make sure that they're in place to protect in the future. In the case you're talking about, my overall opinion is, based on the level of traffic, that there wouldn't be a particularly high level of potential for fraud there.
Right. So thank you. So you do have some indicator of the impact of a fraud. You get a feel of whether it's high, low, or medium based on the department, its revenues, its throughput. And is that how you measure it? Is that how you get the feel for it?
It would. In terms of the baseline assessment of the fraud risk assessment, yes, very much so. In terms of isolated incidents, we would look at materiality there, and we would determine what's the potential materiality and the potential loss there, and that would then drive how we investigated that and the reporting outcomes that would come from that.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew,
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that this committee has a look at, we have an anti-fraud and corruption, bribery and corruption strategy, which the committee looks at annually. So you're next due to look at that in October, which looks at the overall position of the council, working with SWAP and a range of other partners about how we deal with fraudulent activities and then how we tackle those. So it will come back to it in as much more detail in 2 meetings' time.
Mark, I want to seeing what's under on training and that kind of thing, getting new people in. But Ian did mention about some elements of training that you're going to be offering over the next few months, or maybe already.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. We have already started doing some training with some of the services, particularly where we found there is. I mean, there are skills out there, but sometimes the standards of requirement from an audit point of view are different than the standards that they would have up as an operational kind of day-to-day business as usual function. So we're going to those services and we're just trying to support them by delivering training to tell them about our expectations, what we expect as a gold standard in terms of audit and grant administration, and we'll take some feedback from that, and hopefully we will help improve the process.
Thank you, David. Ian, will these training sessions be available to us members? Or relevant to us members?
I think in terms of they are specifically designed for those people that are dealing with grant administration. So they're not general training, they'll be specialised. But certainly if there may be some feedback that comes out of that training, maybe I can report that back to you just to let you know perhaps where some of the issues are and give you assurance that we're actually looking to address those.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's always of interest to us, I think, to learn a bit more because there are so many new things that we are learning.
By all means, I'm more than happy to present to you the training notes that we have for those areas. Whether you will feel they're 100% relevant to you, I don't know, but I'm more than happy to do it if you want.
Thank you.
Mark,
Thank you, David.
on this one.
Yes. On the training then, Ian, what kind of assurance do we have that it's effective? So some form of assessment after training, or is there are you reporting back to the council's L&D department to say these have all been done, new hires have been trained, people are being upskilled, you know, when you introduce a new system, people are being continually improved? Is that part of your remit to provide that assurance that the training is effective? Because obviously we can all go in training, but whether we absorb it all is going to be another matter, and whether it's actually improved our practices.
Thank you, Councillor Mark. That's a very good question. Selfishly, the indicator that the training is worked is that we will get effective grant submissions. We have to audit, SWAP have to audit your grant submissions throughout the year, and some of the issues have been identified during that certification process and that audit process. So that those are the indicators that things were not quite so well in some areas. So again, the feedback and the indicators that things are working successfully will be the next lot of grant submissions, which we'll look at, and hopefully they will be of a much higher standard. And again, if they are, I'll let you know. If they're not, I'll also tell you that as well.
Just to clarify, it was only in the area of grant administration that you identified a need for further training. Is that the case?
Yes, thanks. That's mostly the case, although we are working with the finance team. We're going to look at the commitment accounting areas as well, and look at if there are any particular issues there and how we can support that to other areas as well.
And have we had a specific case of failure in the grant thing?
During the course of the year, the grant process has mostly worked satisfactorily. We have supported and helped. Our approach to grant work is that, you know, clearly we need to, you know, make sure that the grant complies with the terms and conditions, but we are open and we listen, and we'll go back and look for more evidence. So perhaps the process isn't as slick as it should be, but we will continue going back. In terms of the successfulness of that, yes, it's mostly worked, but there have been some occasions where some grants have been returned back to those bodies.
Robert, I'll follow up on that. I think grants have been returned partly because I think it's one of the housing grants that just wasn't the demand. So it's not all driven by our provision. It's what the market is doing. Okay, I think the training is an interesting element. You know, we're recruiting lots of new people. Council is an attractive employer, we want to become more and more attractive employer. We do want some sort of churn of people, but you lose some skills and you want to be able to pass them on to new people. And we talk the business world seems to be the key to an awful lot of it. I don't want to become familiar with the business world, thank you very much, but hopefully people who come into the business. And there was an issue, I think, somewhere about there being no provision for a particular expenditure. And if you find the expenditure's been incurred and there's no provision, then it has an effect on the budget. So that's obviously a concern, which I think you've highlighted and it's mentioned in a number of the action points. Okay, so I think what's the purpose of this one? So it says here the recommendation is that we note the report and consider the assurances provided by the annual opinion report. I think that's fair enough. Do we have any other recommendations, Ben, that you might have noted?
Not specifically, whether or not you just want to perhaps invite Scott to provide a quick overview of the training that's been provided, so that we can share that with members. If there's some areas of particular interest, then perhaps we could seek material subsequently. But that just give an overview of a summary of what's been provided.
So in the recommendation, you'll add that.
We'll add that in action, we'll add that as an action in minutes, and we'll keep track of that, and we'll seek that from colleagues.
Yeah, sorry, could we also have that assurance that it's been effective, the effectiveness of the training? I'm not interested in just, we had 10 people attend the training course, tick the box. We need to know that that was effective training in some way, and whether that's the evidence is in the grant submissions, or the evidence is in the reduction of fraud, or the evidence is in more effective financial accounting, or whatever. We need it needs to be tied into something rather than just present, absent. Thank you.
That would be a challenge for the auditors to come in something like that. Good. Okay, thank you very much. Move on then to item 8. So, Ian, I guess this is you again. These two specific things, I find these quite interesting because they're very, very live and I can kind of picture what this is all about. So,
I think the challenge to Mr. Davis in. Oh, here we go. It's just coming now. There we go.
Perfectly timed.
Thank you, Chair. One of my roles for Head of Internal Audit again is to bring to your specific attention concerns I may have that arise from audit work. So at the last meeting, I indicated that there were 2 items that had limited opinions, and those were registration services and housing solutions, the financial processes. They received limited assurance. But I deferred the presentation of those items to allow officers to attend, to give you the committee assurances and to respond to you. So I thank those officers for their input in that. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Principal Auditor Janine Davis, who's with us today, who's going to run you through the reports and hopefully answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah. So we have 2 limited assurance reports to bring to you today. The first one is registration service, and that's Appendix A, page 57 of your report. To give you a little bit of background on that, we were asked to carry out an audit of the council's registration service following notification from the General Register Office that recommendations from a report had not been followed up. So there were 17 recommendations in the GRO report that they'd submitted to the Council in February 22. The registration service was transferred to the Law and Governance Directorate in July 22, and the Head of Practice Management was tasked with managing the service and addressing the recommendations.
GRO, please.
General Registration Office.
Yes, General Register Office.
So I guess it's government organisation that makes sure that the registration officers
Passport Office.
dealing with births, marriages, deaths effectively.
So a requirement for an internal audit to be carried out was also included in that report. And for the audit that we carried out, the main focus was to review the progress made against the 17 recommendations. And we also included a review of action taken on recommendations from an internal review that had been carried out in October 21. So the findings from that audit, we issued a limited assurance report with 3 priority 1s, 7 priority 2s, and 1 priority 3 required actions. The priority 1 and 2 recommendations related to a lack of control over keys and hence security of council assets, poor stock control processes and record keeping, a lack of action taken on the internal review, and settings within the council as a whole for all reports outside of those from internal audit. Also poor or incomplete records and lack of reconciliations. Issues around IT systems that the service was using, and a lack of control over petty cash. And to provide an update on the progress of the action taken in the report on the recommendations, Philippa Ryde is here today. She's head of practice management, and she's provided a written update on progress, which she'll present to you.
Good morning. So yes, on page 75, I've done a very brief update on where we've got to. As part of the work that I took on when I joined the service in July 22, we also obviously invited internal audit in to undertake a full audit as well. We've also had support from the Programme Management Office, so all the recommendations from the service review, the GRO audit and the internal audit were all put into a project plan, which our project manager has been helping to track with us. Because of the issues around stock control particularly, and the technical support that we needed around that, I engaged with Shropshire County Council, and they came in for 3 months earlier this year, quite intensively. They were with us every week. And helped us put in the security and controls that were required, particularly around the stock. So we're talking about certificates and the registers that we've got in the service. In terms of the aspects around security, none of my officers have got keys to the building anymore. They only go into the building when there are other people in the building, the custodians are present. I'm much assured that our control around our stock and security is now in place, and we've got consistent processes across all the 3 registers that we've got. We've also got processes for our spoil certificates, and we deal with the destruction of those. And we've been doing the quarterly checks that GRO expect us to do, sorry, General Register Office again, that expect us to do every quarter, which haven't been completed for over 2 years. So Shropshire, hats off to them really for really helping us and the team to do that. We have no cash in the office at any time now. It's all done through card machines and online payments. So that we put that in place when Audit were with us to give that level of assurance really that we weren't dealing with any cash. There's still work that we need to do on the income reconciliation side. Shropshire did a lot of work with us, but the way that our pay.net systems work and Business World, we can't track system, processes and receipts through. So we've still got work to do on that, but we are getting there, which is great. On the IT side of things, we have still got a lot of work to do on that. Hoople IT have engaged with us. We have updated all our website pages. We have got some online forms, but there's still a lot that we need to do around that. We really need an online appointment booking system, and we hope to have that by Christmas this year. So, yeah, it's been very, very busy 12 months, and there's still a way to go, but much more assurance that we've got a lot of the processes, staff and the training in place to be able to do the work the General Register's Office expects us to do. They've been in twice since they came in January 22, much more happy with our progress, and they are coming again in 2 weeks' time. So we will give them another update on where we've got to as well. But they're much happier with us than they certainly were earlier in 2022. Hopefully that gives you a
Thank you
progress.
very much for that assurance. How's morale in the office at the moment?
Up and down, I should say. I think I'd say over the last 6 months, it's generally been on the up. I think we've almost doubled our staffing establishment, and staff are getting the development and support that they need that they hadn't had previously. They can see that the changes that are being made are helping them in their day job, and that means that they're providing generally a much better service to the public as well. I think the next step about having an online appointment system will vastly improve things, and we have a huge amount of phone calls, so there's still a lot of frustration from the public in getting hold of us because we are still on the phones and we are still dealing with emails. The more we can get online, the quicker we should be able to deal with things. So we're still in a bit of a storm, but getting better.
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Philippa. On the quarterly checks, so that's a new process. How many of those have you had so far? I can't work it out if it's from January 22 or is it from since then? And how disruptive are they considering how busy you are?
It does take a while. There was a backlog of 2 years which Shropshire helped us clear, so their staff essentially did those checks for us. So they brought us up to date to the end of March. So we're just completing the ones for the end of June. It does take a long time to do those checks. We've got new staff in that are still learning that as well. But we've got to keep on top of it now, and the more as we go through with these staffing in the training, they will be doing more of the checks, so we've got more capacity to do it than we have done in the past. So we are getting there.
So have you done one complete quarterly check yet, or are you on the second one, or is this the first one?
So we're doing the first one that we've done, so we're just finishing that off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by the next report, how many is there going to be another, is it the same time this year, next year, you would have had 4 opportunities to go through it?
Yes, approximately, yes. This time next year, yes. Yeah, there'll be 4 more checks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Philippa. Just a little note that doing away with cash does not necessarily do away with the possibility of dishonesty. And indeed, IT systems that manage things are often more vulnerable rather than less so. So I wonder how you double check that the wholly non-cash system you're introducing has not got any backdoors in it or any other shortcomings.
I think the fact that we haven't got cash significantly reduces the risk. We've still got to put the systems in place that we are monitoring the income, and we know that we've issued 20 certificates and that equates to X amount of money, and we can see that in our budget reports. That's the point. I'm still not happy we've got there. But the next couple of months we will do that. But it's any IT system, isn't it? It's the checks and balances and people like internal audit coming in and others looking that we appear to have got that in place. And yeah, clever people can still find their way around systems. It's just making sure we've got all the checks and balances in that we know we can put in that will catch people out if they do that.
Obviously, from what you've said, you're on top of this. I just hope all of your staff don't have the feeling, well, we've got rid of the cash, that's okay then, because often it is not enough. You're obviously aware of that. Thank you.
Janine or Ian, I don't know whether you had any observations from an internal perspective on that.
Well, I think, fraudsters are very clever. So, officers will need to maintain their awareness and be very aware of that. But also, the council need to consider their own internal processes and their own internal staff as well. Things like certificates, which are very valuable today to a fraudster. And so there just needs to be constant awareness, constant checking, constant monitoring, and we'll be part of that, but initially it will come from the services. But I'm very happy with the response.
Thank you for huge improvement on where we were a year ago. Any other questions? Chris,
could somebody just tell, it seems from the report that we don't really know if large scale, medium scale or small scale fraud, theft has been committed or may have been committed. Is that still your opinion? We just don't know because there weren't any proper reconciliations of cash, numbers of certificates, is that right?
Certainly when Janine was auditing, we tried to unpick it as much as we could, didn't we? And got to the point that actually the record keeping previously was so incomplete that actually we couldn't track through their systems. So the potential for fraud was there, but we wouldn't have been able to find it. I'm much more assured now that we have reduced that risk, as I said previously. But yeah, we don't know what we don't know from previously.
Okay, can I ask a supplementary, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems that all this was brought to our attention by the General Register Office inspection in February 2022. Is that right? So the process of putting things right started from that inspection by an outside body?
To be honest, it only really started when I took over in July 2022.
Okay.
The internal review from 2021 had not been dealt with, and neither had the GRO audit.
Okay. Did we have a previous GRO inspection at any time prior to February 2022? I'm just wondering what prompted their inspection.
So they come in on a regular basis. There was a report from 2017 that I saw, and there were aspects that they hadn't been dealt with in 2017 that were still in the 2022 audit when they came in.
Right, so it's 5 years of kind of not really being assured that things were as they should have been. Right, thank you.
Aubrey.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a daily reconciliation of the certificates issued and the power payments received for those certificates.
There are daily record sheets where they keep a track of the certificates that have been issued when they've been registering births and deaths. And that does then equate in terms of the money that they've taken. Yes, so there are daily banking sheets, but it's following that through the system in terms of what then goes into business world as well.
Yeah, right. So I had personal reason for using the registrar as part recently, and I was delighted with the flexibility and their service. Please pass on my thanks to them. Ben, so the recommendation here is that we note the reports. No, I don't want to go. I'm sorry.
We've got the heading solutions indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go.
Jean's going to speak to you now, I think.
Thank you, Chair. We have a second limited assurance report to bring to you today. That's the Housing Solutions Financial Processes report, and that's on page 69 of your pack. We carried out an audit of the financial processes within the Housing Solutions team with the agreement of the Director for Community Wellbeing, following an audit of the homelessness prevention grants where some control weaknesses were identified. Following the audit, we issued a limited assurance opinion, which contained 6 priority 2 actions and 4 priority 3s. The priority 2 actions were in respect of management and use of procurement cards, administration of the homeless loans payments, resilience and segregation of duties. The issue was that one individual was carrying out a substantial amount of financial processing, documentation of procedures, and end of tenancy maintenance costs, which were not budgeted for. To bring you an update on progress today, Lee Davis is here. He's Head of Prevention Support Services, and has a written update for you, and he's going to explain a little about that for you.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. So on the procurement cards, a review of the use of the procurement cards has been completed. This has enabled the establishment of business accounts with providers, and this will dramatically reduce the need to use procurement cards. There is an interim housing solution manager in post following we've had a wide review of the structure and the delivery of housing services, and this has been part of that review. So we have a management overview now in place on the approval of individual spend on the procurement cards. We take the view that, well, we do know that although our established providers who are on a framework are able to use business accounts, that means that we wouldn't need to use procurement cards for them. But we do occasionally need to use new providers, not yet on the framework. So where but we can find that on a Friday afternoon, Friday evening, we have a duty to provide temporary accommodation to someone that night, and we have to find a provider. We have to find a bed and breakfast or a hotel provider. Occasionally, and indeed more so recently, that has also been providers from out of the county, unfortunately, and they may not be on our business accounts, so we would have to use procurement cards for them. So, but the use of business accounts for our major providers has dramatically reduced the use of procurement cards. And we have put in place a management overview and approval of the individual spend on the procurement cards. On the homeless loans payments, these are quite low scale. We had 7 of them in 2022-23, a total of £4,500. And again, registered providers that we work with, registered providers of social housing, are required to provide invoices now, and that's complete, and we are compliant with that recommendation. Again, smaller one-off suppliers, it may be difficult for them to supply invoices within the timescale required, so we are holding on to the potential use of impressed accounts for that scenario. But major providers, significant providers, are now providing invoices in line with the recommendation of the audit. Similarly, on the authorisation of impressed accounts, this was being authorised, as is being said, by a particular post within the organisation. And now the process being followed is that 2 signatories via email are required in order to approve these impressed accounts. And the forwarding of that email trail, those emails, provides an audit trail showing both the requester and the approver in all cases. And we again believe that this meets the requirement that was put in there. The process and procedures that were mentioned, very much as part of a wider review of process and procedures across the whole delivery of the housing solutions. And that review continues, operational and personnel matters, I'm afraid, have slowed down the process. This is a priority within the service delivery plan. The 30th of September. Staff absences in that service for some time, and as I said, there has been a wider review, so that will be completed by the 30th, so I'm afraid we have not yet completed that one. On the resources matter, the fact that there's only one member of the team that's been processing requisitions, again, the future structure of the housing services for one of the recommendations housing review, and that has highlighted this particular element of one-person staff resource, and a revised substructure focusing on the resilience is to be implemented by the newly appointed head of housing, who takes post today. So that is being picked up in that review. The deadline for that we were given was the 31st of October, so we're still in time frame for that one. But that's there. On the petty cash, there was a cash imprint account with a recommendation that should be reconciled and closed. It has not yet been formally closed, but it is not in use. It has not been used since this was identified. But again, the actual formal closure of that will be completed by the 31st of August, but it is not in use. Similarly, with the chequebook account, this will be completed by the 31st of August. So we will close those down. And the use of imprest account when the business world could be used. We've agreed that the imprest process will be only used, as I've said, for one-off suppliers. This is complete with recommendation 9, and the recommendation 10 was around commitment accounting at the end of the tenancy that was referred to about a maintenance charge, and this is complete. The housing service lead will ascertain now, has ascertained a mandatory cost associated with void works, and the directorate accountant has added an account analysis code with that budget into our housing budgets. So that one is complete. I hope that took some assistance to councillors this morning.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions? Robert?
Yes, thank you very much for the report, Mr. Davies. When I was reading the pack before this meeting, this particular thing astonished me, I have to say. When I read that people are spending council money without any checks, according to this, I'm very reassured that now there are processes in place. But it applied both to the P cards and to the imprest account, apparently, that there were how many years we've been spending money without any oversight whatsoever. I was astonished, frankly. Is there anywhere else where council people are spending money without any oversight?
I'm afraid I cannot comment on other services within the council. I'm sorry, councillor.
I'm happy to respond. As part of our audit work, the answer to that is no. Does it happen? I can't say that absolutely, but part of the internal audit process, and in fact the managerial process for the management of P cards, should mean that doesn't happen. There is resilience in place, there is validation and authorisation controls there. So as far as I know, no, but internal audit and the council will continue to monitor that situation.
Yes, the report said that up until this procedure was brought into place, starting from April, where they started working on this, there was no check at all. That's what this report says. There was no management overview and approval of individual spend on the procurement card. That's what it said.
Rob, I might just wait for Andrew to come back. I think he might be able to answer or respond in some way. Mark?
Thank you, David. Lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. You mentioned about one of the recommendations was to set up business accounts.
Yes.
Could you tell me how tell us how those business accounts were selected?
Yes, this was through the invitation into a framework agreement with local providers of temporary accommodation. So those we knew and those that we thought might be interested were invited to begin with what I understand first is a tender process, but then becomes a framework agreement. So other providers can join that framework agreement. It's an open agreement that people can join from now on, so it's not closed. But there was a process undertaken by a procurement department, I believe, in terms of meeting certain requirements in order for them to be registered as providers on that framework agreement. So the business account then relates to that agreement.
Okay, thank you. So you will have a list of like approved providers that we'd be able to see if we wanted to.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And we have a question for you from Robert, and he was mentioning finding number one. This is the housing solutions. It says there is currently no management overview and approval of individual spend on procurement cards. And Robert's concern is, well, pretty horrified to read that, and then just to seek some assurance that there are other issues within the council where this same might be true.
Thanks, I apologize, I haven't made that taken about that. The arrangements for the P cards are that there is each card is issued to every individual, so we have a clear trail who's got which card, and they authorise their spend through an automated system where they can code it, and the managers get sight of that spend, so there is management oversight in terms of the spend. But we don't have a manager overseeing every single P card transaction, if that makes sense, because we delegate and trust our staff to make those decisions, and we can monitor through at a corporate level in terms of where the spend is. So I think that be assured we do have oversight of what people are spending on P cards, and they are for low value transactions, which actually by the time we raised a purchase order on DX, would spend more on the processing than most of the actual transactions would cost us. So we do have that assurance process, and it's one of the risks that we have to take as an organisation in terms of managing payment of what are low value, high volume transactions.
So may I assist, if I may, Chair? So what was happening in Housing Solutions was that the individual professional was actually choosing that we had a duty to accommodate this person, and was making this, was authorising that work. The performance budget and income resource officer was actually handling the P card. So there were two people involved, and then as Andrew has said, then there is an overview on the spend. What we've introduced is actually a further level approval by the manager on the individual spend, if that's persistence. So it wasn't that one person just did everything. There were three people involved, but there wasn't an absolute manager agreeing that spend at an individual spend basis.
Thank you very much. That's rather reassuring. I regretfully hadn't had an opportunity to read the full finding processes audit. But perhaps the wording of the finding could have been a little less scary in saying that there was some management oversight, but perhaps incomplete, and that's now been dealt with by this new procedure, because that's a very scary description of what the situation was.
Indeed, but I value all its ability to scare operational managers.
Ian, you wanted to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think in hindsight, maybe we could have worded that a little bit differently, and so I'll take that on board. And just to give the committee some more reassurance, there's actually a project ongoing at the moment looking at purchase cards specifically across the whole of the council, and it's looking at the fraud controls, and there's a data analytical process going on there. So hopefully I'll be able to come back to you and give you the reassurance that across the whole piece that those controls are working effectively.
Thank you.
Yeah, you might know that, Ben. Any other question? Yes, Aubrey.
Yes, stirred by staff resources, the risk of service delivery, and one person was processing all the information. Is that still the case, or have you put in
As I speak, we only have one performance budget and income resource officer, and it's I've not seen the detail of the review, but I know that this was brought up very clearly within the review, and is one of the matters that is to be addressed under the under the restructuring of the redesign of the service.
That will be fairly soon.
That will be very soon, yes. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so going back to the recommendation, the committee noted the reports, and we're assured of the risk under the internal reports. Housing, registration service, housing solutions have been suitably mitigated. Any qualifications to that, Ben?
Only if you want to specifically note that there's sort of a project looking at purchase cards and related controls, just so that you've got that recorded for it to come back to in the future.
Mark, your question about, in what, or 3 months' time, in 12 months' time, there will be a number of reviews of the data in the registrar. So do you want any sort of reassurance that, that those reports have not uncovered any issues?
I think my concern is that it would be, as was indicated by the report there, that it's very disruptive at the moment, and that I'm hoping that it will become less and less disruptive the more practiced they become, so that in the next report from the Registrar Department or GRO, we get some sort of feeling about how these quarterly checks are improving the system, rather than obstructing it and just being a big paper chase. Maybe that's not, I think they have to do it, but those quarterly checks are being effective.
Yes, we don't necessarily need that to this committee, but
certainly we can record it in the minutes that that's what you wanted to raise. I mean, in terms of the next item we come on to is the update on internal audit recommendations. So this item will be tracked through that report going forward as progress in any case, so that an opportunity to see where things are in going forward as well.
So if we move on to the next item, we'll be on with that. Item 9, so this is an update to an audit recommendations, and I think hit. So, yeah. And Lee, thank you for your contribution. So Amy, I don't know whether you want to introduce this, whether you'll did that for us.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So thank you, Chair. So yes, obviously we've got the report, couple of reports here today for myself and the performance team to cover this one and then the next agenda item. I'm kind of relatively new into post into the strategy and performance role over the last sort of few weeks. So I invited Kevin Lloyd here today, who's the performance team lead, just to give you a bit of an overview of this report and just to talk you through, and obviously then we'll take any questions you have for that. So Kevin, can I just hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Hello, everybody. The report before you presents an update on the progress made in our responding to recommendations made by SWAP in audit reports issued before April 23. It's important that I say before April 23 because you've just had an update about housing solutions, which isn't included in this report, and that's because the report was published in April. So we're just focusing on those that are made before April. It's split into 3 sections. Those recommendations previously reported to committee as incomplete, those recommendations due between October 2022 and March 2023, and then those recommendations that have become due since the end of March. The updates on the recommendations can be found in the relevant appendix attached. Of the 30 recommendations that were previously overdue, paragraph 8 shows that half have since been completed, 1 deferred, and 14 remain outstanding. Paragraph 9, 47% or 17 of the 36 recommendations due in period are reported as complete. And of the 4 future recommendations, paragraph 11 shows that 75% are currently complete or on track. It should be noted that from previous forecasts, we've been reasonably accurate, so we can expect that those will be reported as complete when we next bring it to committee in 6 months' time. Just for reference, when next reported, the future recommendations will appear as those due in period, and the quantity will actually increase because it will include the audits that are published between now and the end of September. just an overview, the focus needs to be on ensuring those historical recommendations are acted on, or at least there's a statement to the effect that the changes have taken place within the service that mean the recommendations are no longer relevant. To ensure that there's that our completion rates do improve in the future, recommendations are to be included in the new service business plans that are being written at the moment. So we should expect higher completion rates, which will be reporting to committee in the future. And as Ian from SWAP alluded to earlier on, we're being given access to their system so that we can provide progress updates directly, ensuring that all recommendations are recorded and responding to in a timely manner. If you've got any questions, I'll try my best to respond.
Any questions from? Yes, Mark. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, who was it? Not Amy, it was
Kevin.
Kevin. Hello, Kevin. Thank you for your report. The performance management system that you're going to be reporting into, that's owned by SWAP, is it? You're saying that SWAP has a risk management system or performance management system, and you're going to be recording, or you're going to have access to it?
Right. Okay. What currently happens is that the report, as and when the SWAP audit reports are published, the performance officers are given access to those, and we liaise with the services to ensure that recommendations are progressed during the agreed period, and we provide updates to relevant services, directorates, and the corporate leadership team, bringing a report to this committee every six months. In the past, there have been instances where reports may have not been circulated to the entire audience. So I've been speaking with Amy Probert in SWAP, and they record all the recommendations that they issue onto their own system. So we're going to be given access to that system, which should ensure that no recommendations fall through the net. So everything is responded to in a good time. We will continue to monitor and report internally, but it just gives SWAP a speedier access to our progress updates as well, which will help them inform their future follow-up reports.
Okay, thank you very much. And so, yeah, to follow up with you, Ian, on the SWAP system, what do you call it, by the way, the SWAP system?
The SWAP system is called Audit Board. It's a new system. It's been implemented into SWAP from April the 1st. I think the benefits of that are that, one, we'll record all of the actions, the agreed actions, as Kevin has said, so we know that that's a complete store of issues that we identified. There will be background behind all of those issues as well, so that the committee will be able to see those. And not at the moment. At the moment, the resolution or the indication of resolution will probably be part of Kevin's team's responsibility and our responsibility. But in the near future, we will have a system where the individual services will go into the system and then keep that implementation progress live, so that at any point in time, the committee, myself, Andrew, can have a look at all of the outstanding actions and get a real-time live view of where we are in terms of delivery.
Thank you. That sounds excellent. And can I ask who is providing that service? Is it Hoople or is it?
No, that's part of our partnership we have with the council.
Right.
Thank you, Mark. Any other? Okay. Mark, you've got your background and experience in this area, so thank you for your contribution. Frank.
I think because there's so many things previously overdue on the report before me, is this something we're catching up with? And was there a cause why so many things that we've heard this morning seem to have drifted off, but now we're playing big catch up across the board? Is there some apparent reason that we don't really know? That's just as a quick.
Andrew, I think it's one for you.
Thank you, Chair. During the COVID period, the council's activities changed quite significantly. So during that time, we gave out grants to whole raft of businesses. We gave away over £100 million, and we had to build a whole new raft of processes to do that effectively, to make sure that we minimise the fraud. So there was a big change in the emphasis of how we deal with that. We had a lot of other COVID type grants that a lot of staff colleagues were diverted onto, so that there has been a period when all of those normal activities the council almost kept going as best as they could be, but a lot of the management time, staff capacity was put into dealing with the COVID response. That has now all reset, and we're just coming to the end of that process. But what you're seeing here are some of the realities of maybe our attention was on other things. Some of these things have been allowed to slip, certainly some of these recommendations. And I've got some of these, and some of my people in my team have. And most of there will be a story behind that where we were actually prioritising our priorities and getting grants out to businesses, all of the COVID type responses, providing the PPE was the forefront of our activities, and we're now seeing in fact the legacy of that. But you can see from the report we are catching up slowly but surely, and I prefer us to be catching up quicker, but there are some practical realities of keeping the organisation going as well. So that's the honest answer as to why there was a bit of a blip, because a lot of the organisation moved into a COVID response mode, as well as everybody working from home. But all of our legal obligations around providing support for children and adults who need care, those type of things, carried on as well.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that's well made, Frank. So, there are target dates beginning 31st of January 2021 here, and it's 3 years later, and we're actually so we'll be catching up. So maybe some of the targets are unrealistic to start with. Any other questions on that? Okay, well, a new committee, Andrew, will be looking at this quite interestingly over the next 6 months. Pretty significant improvements in that period. It does depend on resources available to you. Okay, so we could take a break for 10 minutes now. Would that be convenient, or should we do the risk? I think we have a thumbs up for a 10-minute break.
Just confirm the resolution just on that item. So effectively noting that the status of audit audit recommendations, and you haven't to send any further recommendations at this time, but clearly it's an area of interest going forward.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so if we could close.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. We're moving on now to item 10, which is the corporate risk register, and this is a report by the head of corporate performance, who I guess is you, Amy.
Yes. Hi, me again. Yes. So I'll sort of cover this. I'll cover this report off. So, committee in front of you.
For the benefit of the other councillors who don't know you, you're not new to the council, are you, by any means?
No, sorry. Yes. So I'm recently appointed into the Director of Strategy and Performance role, probably about 6 weeks now. So part of that role is having oversight and responsibility, obviously, of the performance team, performance of the council, and within that is the risk element as well. So yeah, I've been in the post about 6 weeks now, but previous to that, I was the service director for communities in community wellbeing, and had a sort of oversight of libraries, museum, archives, leisure, and talk community. So I've been with the council some time, but just slightly new into this role.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so just before the committee today, there's a report regarding the risk register and the corporate risk register. So from a council perspective, we have a number of different risk registers, and the corporate risk register is having oversight of the key risks, I suppose, across the organisation. This report shows you mainly up until the end of the financial year. There are some in there from June as well. What it shows you is that currently there are 16 corporate risks in the risk register, and also 73 in our directorate risk register. So from a process point of view, all the directorates have a risk register that they review on a monthly basis with their service directors and their corporate directors, which then reports into the corporate risk register should the risk need to be escalated and be at the scoring of between 16 and 25. So what you'll see in the report in terms of the corporate risk register, those risks are scoring of 16 to 25, and then the next level down is 9 to 15, which is then reported and overseen by the directorates and the corporate director as part of their directorship leadership team meetings. So this is, like I said, it's just giving you an overview in terms of where we are with regard to our risks. You will also notice in the report that back in March, my predecessor attended the committee at that point to give a bit more of a detailed overview in terms of the risk register, with a discussion around taking forward a more of a strategic approach of the risk register and our risks, and to review the risk management and the programme of risk management. What that report sets out in terms of some areas that worked well. So some areas included good regular reporting and updates from corporate directors and directorates, and having sort of that robust oversight. But there were sort of a number of areas in terms of being clearer in terms of the risk register. So there was a decision made at that point that some more work would need to be undertaken on the risk register to look at things like aggregation of risks, understanding of accountability and action planning, and also sort of the CLT, so the corporate leadership team, having challenge and more ownership of the risks in the corporate register. There was also an element of training that was going to be recommended. It was going to be provided by the insurance company, and with the sort of the change in personnel with regard to, like I say, my predecessor and me recently starting, we're now looking to have that undertaken sort of in the next couple of months with the other insurance company. Within the appendix as well, you'll see the appendix shows the corporate risk register, but it also provides an overview of the directorate risk registers as well. So the community wellbeing, children and young people, economy and environment, and corporate centre directorate risk register as well. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an overview. Happy to take any questions or further discussion.
So I see this as an opportunity just to bounce around a few ideas. You'll have to, as officers, tell us if we're going into territory we shouldn't be doing. But let's explore it and see where we move. I was quite interested to look at another council, see how they look at this. And if I show as an example, on page 141, we've got development sufficiency strategy, and the risk score is 25, and then the risk score after controls is 20, and then it says further mitigation is required. So I'm just curious as to what the sort of target is. So you know the core controls is 25, risk score is 20. So what is kind of an acceptable level of risk? Because there's no point in keeping striving at something if we're never going to get below 20, but at what point in time does it sort of drop off? And I think I did see one of the other risks which was scored at 25, and it actually dropped off the risk register for some reason that it didn't seem to, it didn't seem to have been an improvement, but it was still dropping off. Yeah, I mean, it's not 20, perhaps it's just 20, but on page 149, there's impact of statutory direction. The risk score was 20 before controls, risk score after controls is still 20, and then in the narrative it says further mitigation required, yet that's been de-escalated from the corporate risk register, and I don't quite understand how that kind of works. And then the other authority I was looking at, they do have a target. But I think there must be a realisation that some of these risks are going to remain potentially forever. I think in children's we need to be working on it. It needs to be on the risk register because the impact is so big. I mean, looking at the multiplier, the likelihood against the impact. So 5 times 5, I guess if the likelihood to reduce to a 3, but the impact was huge, so that'd be a 15, and that might make it an acceptable risk to come off the register. But when do things come on and when do things go off? It's just a bit of a question for you haven't had time, Amy, to think about it like that.
I think obviously, as you quite rightly say, we don't have targets, and then obviously they're all managed. Those risks that are on the corporate risk register are all managed by the directorates and have an oversight from the service directors and the corporate directors, who will ultimately make that judgment of their professional judgment in terms of whether the risk needs to be at what level, and where it needs to sit with regards to the corporate or the directorate risk register. Ultimately, the framework that we've got in place at the moment, if it's a certain score, it should remain on the corporate risk register, and then sort of, obviously through following mitigation or following any changes in that risk, and the changed score then subsequently changes, obviously then the review will be undertaken as to whether it then needs to be sort of reduced down to oversight from a directorate point of view. I think you're right. It's kind of feels quite timely at the moment with I suppose with the new committee members, with myself recently into posters, to actually having a bit of an overview and a review of the risks and the risk register in terms of how often we do keep things on there, how do they get managed, and what's our kind of that process of assuring ourselves that we've got all the appropriate risks on there as an organisation, and we have clear oversight of those. And this was part of, I understand, as part of the report that came back in March around actually some of the things that were having a review of some of the things that were going well, some of the things that needed kind of improving, and then taking it forward in terms of a bit more of a strategic oversight of the risk register.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. I'll go to the councillor first. Frank, I'll go there.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I was just trying to assess the word risk. The risk that we're looking at mainly is that in relation to, we want to make our county and all our facilities safe so that the public are not injured and cause us A, embarrassment, or B, we have to put out, pay monies out as a part of a claim. Is that the principle behind a number of the risks? There are obviously lots of other types of risks, but is that one of them? So, for example, ensuring that all our town and city streets are safe, so as members of the public do not trip on pavements. Am I looking at that as part of your overall risk that you look at?
I mean, yeah, and on all projects and all areas and all services will be looking at their own risks in terms of, what they need, what risks are, what are the big risks, what are the risks that need to kind of be incorporated and captured, and what are the biggest risks to the local authority that I kind of need to have oversight. So, and the one you kind of described obviously is something that as a directorate they would consider themselves as to, is it a risk or is it not a risk, and then if it is, what it needs to be done to be included in terms of the risk register. I think you make a really good point, because actually some areas that I've been looking at as well, that they've got a risk framework, is actually, what is the risk? Is it a strategic risk? Is it a service risk? Is it a kind of financial risk? And I think as well, what we could be doing is probably demonstrating that probably a bit more clearer in terms of the reporting of it. But ultimately, these risks are owned, managed, and have oversight from the directorates as to whether those risks should be within it. Within the risk register, and what those mitigation actions are, and what's that impact then onto the local authority.
Thank you.
Peter.
Yes, my answer, Chair, is about the table of summary of changes across the directorate risk registers on page 138. There's one real standout figure there of items in the corporate support column that have been de-escalated, numbering 13 in number, whereas most of the other figures in the table are 2 or similar numbers. Is there an explanation, something unusual has happened in particular to cause that?
Sorry, I'm just kind of, which one were you looking at then, sorry?
The summary of changes across the risk registers on page 138. The corporate support column has a real standout figure of 13 as the number of items de-escalated from the directorate risk register. It stands out particularly because most of the other numbers are more like 2.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got that, it's page 4 of your
Yes,
report.
yes, sorry, I'm just bringing it up now, I'm just looking at the risk register. And as to the reasons why, I mean, I wouldn't know offhand as to absolutely the reasons why all of those have been de-escalated. They are in the appendix, and there's some of the reasons sat behind that. You'll see that in the appendices on the corporate risk register for corporate services. You'll see that there's some reasons that sit behind the de-escalation.
That's the Appendix A.
That is in Appendix E.
Right, thank you, yes.
So you'll see there, you'll see there that towards the bottom of it, it breaks down in terms of risks that are de-escalated and then risks obviously that have been closed and the reasons why.
That's great, thanks. I was looking at A, not E, which are both corporate items.
Yes.
Thanks, yeah, okay.
Yes, and again, that's sort of that. I think, looking at the report back in March, that kind of also causes slight confusion because the corporate risk register that we're kind of having oversight of here today, which have the 16 on, that's the one across the organisation. But actually, we've got a corporate services department, which Andrew, myself, Tracy Sampson, HR, and Claire Porter from Legal Services are all within. But that's kind of like an area of service area. So yeah, again, I think there's a kind of slight confusion there. But I think also my understanding is as well, there was a review of the register recently undertaken. Obviously, that is undertaken sort of regularly. And it was that down to the service, obviously, who made the decision as to what needs to be de-escalated and the reasons for those scores to de-escalate those.
Thank you. I'll read it more thoroughly.
Robert.
Yes, thank you very much. You're probably aware that last week, for Council, we reiterated our statement that we're facing a climate emergency in this county and, of course, nationally. Is that the existing risk factors, the way they've been assessed, did that take in account the fact that that was already our position from 2 or 3 years ago, or does it need changing in the light of the possibility that the end of human civilization is a bit more important than tripping over pavements?
Yeah, obviously what we'll need to do is, I'm just flicking through the risk register now to ensure that we capture that risk. And again, we'll look to work with Ross Cook and his team in terms of that risk and what we need to add into the risk register to capture that decision that was made last week.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it was just a reiteration of an existing position from a previous council meeting.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Robert, that's an interesting reflection, isn't it? What is the risk if we don't do sufficient to push back?
Well, clearly the end of human civilization. So I'm a Tory saying this, so goodness knows what the Greens are going to say about it.
I mean, there are some elements in the EE elements, ecology, resource, national back, severe weather, and other emergencies. So there are elements of it, but I think it needs to, as you say, corporately, it looks across the whole lot. So that's something for you to put in your thinking cap, I think, Amy.
And it covers all the areas. It's not just environment. It covers every one of our responsibility areas.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I think, I completely agree, and I think actually as part of that review, I think we need to be really clear, some of those risks, such as climate, is like you could absolutely say, is cross-cutting, is across all areas. So actually, there's some key ones that need to remain on, that are, across our key areas, and almost that strategic risk register that could potentially have, a huge impact. As well as skills, as well as jobs, as well as growing the economy. They're the key things for us as an organisation as well, aren't they? So there might, what's something that I would certainly be looking at, see actually how do we have that kind of that strategic oversight of some of those key issues that impact on every area of the organisation.
I think what I'm supposed to say, this perhaps isn't the detail of this committee, but it's something to go to the scrutiny committee for the environment to say, well, what are the risks, and let them do all the work on it, and then report back to us or provide some information to us. Rob, do you want that committee?
I'm sure Alyssa will be delighted for you to give her even more work to do on that.
Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Like what you were saying, that, do you have ways, maybe I'm not reading this correctly, because the language around risk is so obtuse sometimes. It necessarily is. It needs a whole new way of terming it. But do you have these themes of risks that run across different departments that can be brought out so that we can assess them and we can see it has environment been taken into consideration, has children's services. I mean, I was speaking earlier today, you know, that children's services is impacted by risks from different departments as well. But it's difficult if everything is aligned by department. How do we see this across department? Is that what you were trying to describe when you meant strategic risks? They're cross-departmental and they are surfaced in some way that we can identify how they're worked. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That's what strategic risk is.
Yes.
Following on from that, and this is going cross back to SWAP and Ian, you have a system as well of recording risk, is that right? Not
risk. No, not risk. We record audit actions and risks around audit actions, but it's not a risk management system. It's different.
Right, but you will have risks relating to auditing.
Yes, correct.
And do those marry up with the risks that Amy's been talking about in corporate or departmental? Should they align in some way?
They very well. I guess. As part of our work, when we do our plans, we look at risks and we carry out a risk assessment across SWAP. We look at all of the risks across our partners. We'll also look at the council's position, and we will make sure that our internal audit plan aligns with the risk management framework and the risk management outcomes. So where there is a risk, at least we're going along and giving you some kind of idea whether the mitigation is working. So that's the alignment, but we don't.
So this is where I get confused. So you've got risks and mitigations, but then the corporate risk register also has risks and mitigations. Are they different? Are they aligned? How do we check these things? Sorry, Amy, yes, I'll take to you.
Yeah, I mean, what we do, I mean, we do review obviously the risks that are coming out of the SWAP audits to see, and again, it will be for the departments to have oversight of what's coming out of the SWAP audit, and then to make that consideration as to whether that needs to be a risk and then included on the directorate risk register. The previous report that you also had presented to you by Kevin and the team was obviously the outcomes from some of the SWAP audit and where we are with regard to conclusions and completions on that. So again, it would be down to the directorates and the services to look at that and say, actually, is that an issue that we would like to have more oversight and put it onto the risk register to assure ourselves that we're putting mitigating actions in place and we're monitoring it. So they will, yes, they do kind of in that sense. I mean, being relatively kind of new into the post, I would need to probably go back to the team and talk to them in more detail, and obviously work with Ian and the team as well around that and that alignment. And I think it's probably also going back to some of the comments I was saying before, is actually we probably need to think through some of the risks that we are identifying, highlighting, having those kind of themes. Is it financial? Is it strategic? Is it reputational? So again, it's really clear in terms of those areas that we're reporting against in terms of a risk position.
Okay. So I had two other issues.
Please.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
It sounded like what Dave was talking about earlier was the risk appetite. Now, that's another funny word when it comes to risk management. The risk appetite is being decided by the directorate, the head of the directorate, is that right, of each department? So they decide whether a risk is, the probability or the impact of that risk, and they decide how important it is. Is that right? Do they, or is there another body that decides, that goes through all the different departments and says, well, actually, you have downgraded that risk, or we think, or another department thinks it's more important? Because if we have people setting the risk appetite of their own risks, then it's potential that they may come across a risk that's really difficult to monitor, and so they'll say, actually, that's not that important, we'll leave that. Whereas other ones that are maybe easier to monitor, easier to assess, easier to measure, you would say, oh, that's an important, we'll work on that one. So how does risk appetite work?
So, sorry, is that? I'll come in there, and I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to cover that. So yeah, it is down to the directorates and the service areas to decide the risk and the level of the risk and the rate to the risk, if you like, and then what those mitigation actions are. It's for those people who are, they're professionals, they're experts in their area, they know what the risks are and how they can ultimately mitigate them. What happens is we do, like I say, have directorate risk registers, which then just get discussed at directorate leadership team, and as part of that you'll have service directors from all across the area be looking at it as well and have an oversight from the corporate director. But no, that is an internal mechanism. We wouldn't necessarily have an external partner coming in to look at that for us, but it is undertaken by the individual directorates.
Okay, thank you. And just the final one, sorry, I'm on, this is the hard one. I noticed on the corporate risk register there's a role name, because you can't put individuals' names next to as risk owners. So there's potentially, like you say, they could be the leadership team, they could be directors, they could be other people who are risk owners. The system kind of depends then on the people who are feeding, the results into it and who are monitoring it. So how do we know that we have sufficient people in those roles to do the risk ownership? We heard today that the head of housing, for example, is to be appointed soon. So does that mean that no one's been looking at head of housing risks until the new person is appointed, or do you delegate it to another person who supplements that and becomes the risk owner for a period of time and then hands over the ownership of a risk to somebody else? How does that process work?
So obviously it will kind of depend on each area, but ultimately, and I can't talk for the head of housing because I don't know the detail, but those risks that are associated with with that area, again, they all have oversight from a directorate leadership team meeting. So whoever's sort of covering that post or during that time we'll have to have oversight of those risks, and that's it, which come naturally into the business and their service area. But ultimately it is down to the directors who will have oversight and responsibility for assuring that those risks are, have oversight, have mitigations in place, and are being monitored in an effective way.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go to Peter, start up next. Hand up sometime, Peter.
I said, thank you, Chair. In one of my previous lives, I actually was a risk manager, and I'm a qualified manager of risk professional. So one of the questions I was just going to, or not it's an observation, not a question, is what I've always done against each risk. We've identified how the organisation that I was supporting would deal with it. It would be transfer, it would be accept, mitigate, or whatever. But I've noticed in the way that the council risk register is written, it doesn't have that. Is that part of what Amy's thinking about taking forward?
I think my view is that we should have a good old, a review of the risk register, how we're reporting it, and like you say, how there's different areas in terms of what we could improve. I think, yeah, that absolutely needs to be done and considered.
If you're happy, Amy, we can have a chat outside of this and at some point in the future.
That would be great. That'd be great. Thank you. And we do have a risk management plan as well, which I'm happy to get circulated around the committee. So to have oversight of that as well, so you can have a copy of that. That'd be helpful.
Thank you, Peter. I think it'd be good to have a champion like that on the cabinet and the council. Robert.
Yes, I've been looking down the list of the risk de-escalated, and your comment that the decision on the risk, the level of risk, is made by the corporate director. But picking out one example, cyber attack, it does occur to me that had there been more input, it would have been unlikely to be downgraded in any way. We're in a virtual war with Russia at the moment, And they would love to screw up Herefordshire County Council's IT systems. They would love it if they could do that. And I've no doubt they're trying to do it right now. So how could we possibly downgrade something like cyber attack? Thank you.
I think that's an interesting observation, Robert. What's the role of this committee in challenging that kind of thing? Andrew, I don't know whether you wanted to comment on that at all.
I think, I know, as Aim has highlighted, that there's still further work to do on this, and I share Councillor's concern about cyber attack, and we cannot allow our guard to be dropped in any shape or form at any time about that, because there are people, organisations in the world who are trying to attack us in various ways, and the conversation we've just had about fraud and risk to fraud, that there are people who want to defraud the council at all times. So these are things that are constant. As Councillor Stoddart said, are these things we're accepting? We need to understand what we mean by accept and how we're dealing with those. So I think there is further work to go through that. And I think it's Councillor Stoddart saying that from the Cabinet's perspective, will be the lead for Cabinet is to deal with these things, but it's a fair point about cyber.
Can I come back on that, Chair? Because the wording of what the actual risk is, it talks about we would be in breach of the Data Protection Act, which might end up with fines. I think that's a very minor part of the risk. The real risk is not actually expressed in this, and perhaps that affects how the risk was assessed.
I think there are a number of points here, with this kind of notes. Anybody else is burning?
Councillor Stoddart spoke on.
Yeah, Peter again.
Chair, sort of interrupt, but in a previous life as well, I was chatting to Mark last week. I'm 45 years as a communications information consultant, but also I've done significant work on cyber. So one of the key things on cyber is it's not, you can choose to accept the risk, but actually what your mitigation steps are that you ensure that your systems are as secure as you can possibly be. And that's one of the things that you can put into your risk register, that one of your main areas is to ensure that your system is up to date, what good policies you have, what cyber training you have for people, et cetera, et cetera. So you're mitigating those risks to the best of your ability and making it clear to everyone who reads the risk register that that's what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments in the room? Aubrey.
Just one question. One question on one specific risk on page 156, wetlands development. It says you need to deliver these wetlands at pace to ensure that the requirement to spend 1 million of the LEP grant by 31st of March 2022 is met. Is that a misprint, or have we passed that deadline?
Andrew, can you comment on that?
The date is correct, and we have spent the
Yeah, spent it on
that. So I'm not sure when
So
this update
why
was
is it
provided.
in there? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think maybe other risks really related to the wetlands other than that one. So I've got a number of miscellaneous sort of observations which I'd like to put in the minutes, if you may, Amy.
Yes.
The phosphates issue for us as a county is so big. I think it lies along with sort of cyber and that kind of thing, that it's really important to us, and it's only referred to here in the context of the neighbourhood development plan. So I'd like, if possible, in the context of your work, to be looking at what risks are associated with phosphates. I was quite interested, a wry smile, I suppose, in EE28, EE20. That's the one. Yes, EE20, which is on page 159. So this is a risk de-escalated to service risk. And it talks about highway condition. I was wondering, it surprised me to think that the highway condition was being de-escalated, particularly in the context of the new administration wanting to spend more money on it. So that was just a curious thing to me as to that had happened. There's E56, you probably can't answer, saying it says, notice to terminate lease at the Maltings car park. I don't actually know which the Maltings car park is in Ross. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. You're here for a very good reason. You know, the council does not have the right to use a lease, and the council could do 60% of the car park land. So, Chris, I guess that continues to be an issue to you as far as you're concerned in Ross.
We haven't been told about it, Ross, actually.
All right. Well,
we've heard about it, but we haven't had a briefing about it.
All right. Yeah, in the register. I've got a general point, which is the risk appetite, the risk approach in the council is not just limited to the things which are written down on these lists. It's the report. When you have a schedule at the back of every report, it measures the risks, and I'd like to see an improvement in the wording and the approach to those sorts of reports. A particular reference for me was the museum and library projects. So you know, it's not limited to the risk register. It's only about the organisation and the way these things are written. That was my contribution for the moment. I don't know, anybody, anything else to add at the moment? Mark?
Thank you. Amy, just to help my understanding, when a risk is de-escalated to another risk register, what does that mean? So, for example, page 162, CS08, recruitment strategy. So we've heard today about how training is so important in mitigating fraud, in improving processes and everything. Does de-escalated mean that it's not as important, or does it mean it's being moved under somebody else's area of responsibility?
So there could be a number of reasons. I mean, if it's de-escalated from the corporate risk register, it will go down to the directorate risk register, which where we've got 73 at the moment. And like I said before, the directorates will have oversight. I mean, they have oversight of all the risks, but particularly that kind of just stays at that directorate level. And then continually it's assessed as to whether then it needs to be escalated or de-escalated. Some of the reasons why it has been de-escalated could be that there's mitigating actions in place and things they're starting to see progress. From that, so they might see, specifically there might be specific targets, and they might be seeing more people come into the area that they're, so for that, for example, are they seeing more people who are more trained, they're getting more of the outcomes, so they should be monitoring that from their own perspective, and then reviewing the risk based on the outcomes and that mitigation to see if the mitigation is working. If it isn't, what are the mitigation factors they need to put in or include. So yeah, there'll be a combination of a number of reasons why it's kind of mitigated and de-escalated, but again that will have oversight from the director and agreement from the director as to whether it's de-escalated or not.
Okay, so thank you. So from what you said, the way I understand it then is that de-escalating a risk means it's being managed. Yeah. It's something done about it. It's no longer going to be a high risk element in your risk matrix because you found it, you've looked at it, you've identified it, and it's been devolved back down to the department. So it no longer needs to occupy a high level risk area because you have processes in place and they're working. Is that right?
Yes, and also, actually, it's kind of like the comments we just had before. Is it kind of an accepted risk? That actually is going to be there, and it's been there for some time, and we kind of accept it. But these are the actions we continuously put in place. So yes, you've described it probably far better than I did. I articulated that very well. So yes, that's what I'm.
Yes, one more. I'm pleased to hear that this whole thing, this risk assessment, is going to be reviewed, because I just want to highlight an example of something that refers back to something we said earlier. EE15 is about ash dieback, and in the description of what the risk is, we're talking about biodiversity, we're talking about possibility of injury, but nowhere in there does it mention the effect on climate change. If we're going to lose tens of thousands of trees, that's carbon possibly going to be put back into the atmosphere. So the big risk there is not mentioned, the big risk to CO2 emissions. So we really need to review all of the descriptions of these risk factors to make sure that when we make the assessment, we're basing the assessment properly on the actual risks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Noted, agree.
I think I would like to think that when this register is defined, then we might identify some of the key ones to do a deep dive. Not the whole thing, but just individual ones as a committee, and over the next 2 or 3 years, we look at the most important ones.
Yeah, I support that, Chairman, and some of them jump out at you, so they'd be the ones that would be quite easy to pick out as ones we dive into.
Good. So, Amy, what sort of timescale do you think you're going to need to work to come up with amended plans or a draft? It's not going to be September, is it?
I think realistically, you know, given now we're in pretty much in August and it's you know, it's a holiday season, isn't it, as well? September does seem not too far in the future. So if possible, if the committee are happy with it, maybe sort of a couple of months after that, so maybe sort of November-ish time. If the committee in agreement with that.
I was going to ask Andrews whether he feels that's.
Okay, just looking at your work programme for the next few meetings, we've got September, which Grant Thornton will produce some annual accounts, so it's quite a busy meeting. But there's October, we've got the anti-fraud and bribery corruption policy, which I think the committees I think we want to allocate a reasonable amount of time looking at. So there is a logic to putting this item to your November meeting, but clearly that does mean that that's quite a while since you've looked at it. But in a very clear steer to officers today where you expect improvements and further work to be done. So I can see that working quite well to come to your November meeting.
And I think if the insurance company are willing to provide training for the senior management team and we can be involved in some way in that, I think that would probably put it nicely together. Good. Then, this talks about recommendation of the committee determining any recommendation it wishes to ensure effective risk management. So what have we got for us? One of the things of officers, you could witter away for ages and then you come up with this wonderful list of actions. I mean, you didn't realise you'd had such a good discussion, Ben.
Okay, in terms of clearly that there's any further work on the risk registers to be undertaken. But in terms of that, I think you wanted to invite the Director of Strategy and Performance to explore whether risks are appropriately addressed in terms of the climate and ecological emergency, in terms of phosphates, in terms of matters identified by auditors, in terms of cyber security. And then also you wanted potentially to have a look at invite directors to look at the risk descriptions. And also in terms of actions for the committee, we want potentially to do a deep dive into an example in due course, perhaps after the November meeting, once those are identified. And also I think Amy kindly identified that there's a risk management plan that we can circulate to committee members, so we'll add that as an action.
Okay, thank you very much. We're all happy with that, I take it, thank you. Good, so the next item is the annual report on code of conduct, and we have Claire Porter with us. Claire, we have another Claire. Claire Jenkins is in the public gallery as well. She's here as a member of the public. But Claire, thank you for showing such interest in this subject. So Claire is one of the independent persons for. And she's one of them, and when we had our meeting last week, Claire chaired that meeting. So the other Claire Porter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just, good afternoon. I was going to say it is the afternoon now to everyone. I'm sure you've all had the opportunity of reading the report, but I just wanted to highlight maybe a few points in that report to assist you. At paragraph 8, it did mention there that the independent persons hadn't been asked to give any support to councillors during the period 21 to 23. That is not correct. And I have been advised by 2 independent persons that one of those independent persons had offered support to a number of councillors around the period in the spring of 2022, and another independent person had provided support to a person around 21-22. So in light of that, going forward, we'll make sure that we always ask our independent persons before we do this report for you, and keep a record of the fact, not the detail of the support, but the fact that they have offered that support to councillors that are being investigated or are subject to a complaint. So I think that's very important, because that obviously gives some reassurance that that assistance is there and is used by councillors that are, as I say, subject to a complaint. The other paragraph I wanted to highlight is paragraph 17. And why there has been a little bit of disruption in reporting to this committee with regard to the number of complaints over recent years. And that's because there has, you would have read there, it's not necessarily major stuff, but the first paragraph A mentions there's been there was a changeover of quite a lot of staff this time last year. So that created a bit of disruption with regard to the handover of the processes and how complaints and numbers of complaints. So there was a little bit of issues with timeliness. That is going to be further strengthened going forward, that we are recruiting as we speak for a governance lawyer. At the moment, I have a temporary person who is very experienced, but we need to make that permanent. And also the Deputy Monitoring Officer, Sean O'Connor, who's my Head of Legal Services, will be leading on that and assisting in those investigations. The other 2 points are that we used to have Cornwall Council that assisted in undertaking investigations. And since my appointment to Herefordshire Council, we've removed that because it was just adding another layer. It was creating a lot of confusion. Sometimes we didn't know if they'd replied, had we replied, and that wasn't good enough for the people complaining and for those that were subject to a complaint. So I think since we've stopped using the assistance of Cornwall Council, things, in my opinion, have improved with regard to the timeliness of dealing with such matters. And then, as I say, we were complaints were coming in, and then they were going into the complaints team, and then it was forwarded to another person who forwarded it to another person. And that was it was just kind of double or triple handling, and we've removed that, and now we've got a dedicated inbox. So again, I think that has improved on the efficiency of how we deal with such matters. And then just finally, and we've got Claire, as the chairman has said, who is an independent person and a very experienced independent person observing today. The standards panel did meet recently, and that is highlighted at paragraphs 26 and 27. And they made a number of suggestions, again, to the efficiency of things, and those have been already actioned. And will be actioned. So they're operational matters, again, about improving and giving full reasons for decisions, and sometimes signposting complainants to maybe where else they could go if it didn't actually fall under the Members' Code of Conduct. So those will definitely be implemented. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an overview of the key points that I wanted to highlight in the report. But Chairman, I leave it to the committee if they've got any further questions. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I guess we are all novices to this. None of us had experience at the standards panel before, and it's obviously a very important element of our work to make sure that standards are maintained in the council. And the slightly odd element is that it's also standards within the parish councils, but the only element we can deal with the parish council is standards. Everything else of the parish councils is
I mean, at the end of
our remit, isn't it? Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, it's my responsibility, really, as the monitoring officer and under legislation, to investigate if there has been a complaint and it meets the criteria to investigate. It's the monitoring officer's responsibility to undertake that investigation and to make a judgment on that. I would obviously, if there has been investigation, the law dictates that I seek the views of an independent person. At Herefordshire, we always seek the view of two independent persons as to whether they support my opinion if there's been a breach or there hasn't, and what are their views. They represent the views of the public, so that's a very important role in that I can hear how they would perceive the public would view a particular complaint and the outcome. So that's kind of strictly the role, and as you say with parishes, it's a very narrow role, and ultimately it's my role and not the role of Herefordshire Council, so to speak. It's a sole responsibility of myself, and if I do find that a parish council has breached the code, any outcome goes directly back to that parish council, and then they deal with that. We can't influence whether they accept that recommendation. They don't. It's ultimately a matter for that parish council. They are independent councils. Yeah.
I'll open this up to questions for in a moment, but I just want to talk a little bit about the councils. We as a county have a poor record of people standing in councils.
Sorry, David. I'm kind of, you were going in and out of. Yes, sorry.
We have a very poor record as a county of having elections at all our councils.
Right.
But
yes.
We'd like to encourage people to stand.
Yes.
My particular ward, there are places where I know individuals are on the committee for a parish council for a time, and then they leave, and they have good reasons to leave, but they wouldn't consider raising a complaint because they just don't want to do that. So yes, we've got complaints here. They're the people who are complaining. They aren't the people who necessarily are unhappy with what's happening. And I suspect there's nothing we can do about it, but it's a great shame, isn't it? I think that we can't do things to encourage people to stand as parish councils. And what does go through my mind a little bit is that Sean Davis, the new LGA president, the chairman's considering a new local government bill, and maybe we could play a part in lobbying for greater enforcement powers against people who are guilty of misconduct on parish councils. So do put people up sometimes.
Well, of course, there were much stricter sanctions before, and then I think it was several governments back, but I think it was a Conservative government that removed those sanctions. So there were sanctions that you could remove a councillor. I think it was for up to 5 years, but the sanctions now are, they don't have any teeth. They are quite weak, although obviously it's still, it's probably not very nice if you've been found in breach and your picture's on the front page of the local newspaper. But that's kind of ultimately probably the biggest sanction. It's kind of the embarrassment factor, I suppose. But that is a matter of legislation and the government of the day, whether they wish to. That's a political choice and something that you as councillors can influence. It wouldn't be my role as the monitoring officer to undertake that.
Keep opening up to other councillors. Robert.
Yes, I'd just like to reiterate paragraph 27, standards panel. It was me that raised that during the standards panel. We had a case that we were looking at where it clearly fell outside of the code of conduct. So what we had done is we had replied directly to the complainant and said, sorry, we can't pursue this, it's outside the code of conduct, full stop. And yet clearly there was a clear allegation of lots of other mistakes, wrongdoings by the council, which we could not address. It was outside of the code of conduct, but we had not done anything to suggest to the complainant that there might be other avenues that they could pursue. So I just wanted to reiterate in this committee, I think that's really important because it looks like a terribly bad service when we just say, can't deal with it, sorry, full stop.
Thank you, Robert. I don't know that you need to reply to that, do you, Claire?
No, I hear that. Obviously, it would be each case on its own merits because yes, I think you'd have to look at the particular set of facts, and you've got to remain neutral at all times, and it's perhaps not our role to assist a complainant in their particular kind of attack on a particular councillor. I don't know the facts, but absolutely, if it's quite obvious that, have they thought about the district auditor or this route or that route, or going to the local clerk and speaking with the local clerk, I think we just have to be very, very careful that with regard to perhaps where we are directing, because as I say, it's a very narrow, the role is very narrow, and we've got to be very careful that we don't kind of step into another role. But yes, I do hear you, and I think we are alert to that, and each case on its own merits.
Right, any more? Yeah, Chris?
Claire, a couple of things I would like to see in your next report. I don't know whether the rest of the committee would like this as well. Something about average elapsed times of cases. I can't see anything here about that. Yeah. And also, I'd quite like to see percentages of councillors where they've actually complied with the sanctions. There's nothing about that. You asked apparently for that information from parishes, and you got the information yourself for the county councillors, but it's not in here at the moment. Would you consider putting that in your next report?
Yes, absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense. I think that'd be helpful. Yeah.
Right.
Looking back to 2020, 2021, that there are still 12 open complaints / appeals received. Do they time elapse, or is there some? It seems rather a high figure going back over this period of time. That's being dealt with. And again, I can see straight away that it's also a COVID year. But I doubt if that's anything to do with it. Will they time elapse?
They won't time elapse in that way. As you pointed out, there was an issue over that time period, and there were, perhaps delays that we wouldn't want to happen now because of COVID. Things weren't moving as efficiently as they should do. There isn't a strict time limit. We would indicate, we'd like to hear back from you within 2 weeks, and then if somebody's away, then we'd extend it. There isn't a strict time limit when you would want to, resolve things, but clearly we want to do it as efficiently for the complainant and the member complained about. So I can drill down and get you some information on the timeliness of those, again, which is probably what was mentioned before going forward in the future reports. I think that's probably important to get a feel of how quickly, are they dealt with within 8 weeks, or so some of them take 6 months. Again, it depends on the complexities of the complaint, witnesses, how many people are involved. Then, often you can write, and then it takes a few weeks for somebody to come back, and then they're away. So these things can take a while, but we try and deal with them as quickly as possible for everybody involved, really, because it's not a good thing to be hanging over anybody.
Thank you.
So, Frank, we'd like a report on those 12 cases of some sort, why they're
On the timeliness.
They're going to be closed, and they're going to be closed down, would be helpful.
Yeah.
Any more from anybody remotely? No? Okay. So holding the standards in public life is really important. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the recommendation, the annual report on conduct noted, and there are some actions from that.
Yes, obviously invited the Director of Government Law to consider the inclusion in future reports of the average lapse times of cases and the percentages of cases that comply with the sanctions.
Thank you very much. Shall we move on then to the work programme? just a couple of things that Ash dive at. We've asked for that to be included. I think that is somewhere on the list.
Not specifically. Yes, it's only his action at the last meeting. You asked for an update of that, and that's been sought from the Director of Environment and Economy at the moment. So we'll try and get an update for you on that.
Not so much an update, but actually a report on it. It's mentioned as a risk in the annual audit.
We'll escalate that.
Yeah.
That purpose, yeah.
That one's independent persons. I think that's.
I think we scheduled that for September now, subject to the work being undertaken in that time frame. But again, we've got the August time frame that may make that. But again, we'll roll on to beef officers on when that can be delivered. And as identified earlier, the update on the strategic approach to risk management to be presented at the November meeting. We already have the risk register scheduled on that meeting, so that seems to align quite well.
Anybody else on that? Okay. So the recommendation, subject to any further updates made by the work programme, you noted. So we've noted those 2 additional items. And I think that brings the Aubrey.